everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Tonight we walk the halls of places where care and compassion often intersect with the paranormal, hospitals, nursing facilities, and the like. The intense emotions experienced in hospitals, fear, pain, hope, and loss, can create a sort of heightened environment. Could that environment be the same one that attracts or even manifests paranormal phenomena? Is it only a coincidence that our friends working in these spaces encounter the inexplicable in their daily routines? That people visiting these spaces sometimes experience the paranormal for the first time in their lives? Or is it possible that hospitals, places where life and death coexist so closely, are naturally positioned as thresholds to the other side, where the living can sometimes glimpse what lies beyond? Whether you dismiss these tales as mere fiction or embrace them as evidence of something more, they'll certainly leave you questioning the very nature of the spaces we inhabit and the potential of what lies just beyond them. So, let's get started, shall we? My first job was in a small 35-bed psych hospital in California. It used to be a medical facility where surgeries were performed and, of course, people died. A couple stories here, but first off, when I'd work night shift, I'd sometimes get a phone call from the local police station asking if everything was okay. Sure, everything was fine. All the patients are asleep and it was just a normal night. The police then said that they received a 911 call from our hospital, and the extension from where the call was being made was the arts and craft room. Nobody goes in there at night, not even staff. It's always had a creepy vibe. It used to be where surgeries were performed. The caller, identifying herself as Satana, was asking for help. This would happen about once a month or so. Night shift didn't have much staff, so as supervisor, I knew where all my staff was because I would be the one to help relieve them during breaks. I know with 100% certainty that no staff or patients were the ones calling 911. I know it wasn't a patient because psych hospital doors are locked, and to get to that room, a patient would have to cross 3 barriers of passcode-protected doors. Creepy. I thought so. At other times, our PA would turn on randomly, usually after 10 p.m., and you'd hear breathing and beeping machines. None of our equipment beeped. One time in particular, the PA turned on and you could hear what sounded like a kid speaking, but the content of what he was saying, it couldn't be made out. Then it stopped, then started again, and then you could hear what sounded like outgoing calls playing through the PA. This was impossible to do because to activate the PA, you pick up the phone and dial 77. Once you do that, you lose a dial tone and cannot make an outbound call. So anywho, the PA played an outgoing call for hours, yet not a single phone was ringing in the hospital, so we weren't sure what was happening, let alone how. It finally stopped around 6 a.m., and our patients were pissed. Imagine trying to fall asleep to that. To this day, nobody knew how that happened, and the technician we called out at the time thought that we were pranking him. And that's all I've got. I left in 2014, a year prior to leaving. A patient had successfully taken their life, died right in front of me while we tried CPR. He had hung himself in his bedroom, and I wonder if his ghost still roams the halls. Thanks for listening to my stories. I've experienced something in a hospital a couple of times. I work on the really advanced stuff, and at one facility, I was part of a 2-man team responsible for Linux, which is linear accelerators, radiation therapy units. Most of the hospital was a little grim, even for a hospital, but the cancer center was like a tomb. It comes with the territory that if you work on the high-end stuff, you'll work some odd hours, late nights, and weekends are the norm. So I was completely alone. The department empties at about 5:30, and by 6, you're it. Of course, you could always feel something there, even if it was just you and the phone. One day I was working on replacing a fitting in the gas system, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of an infusion pump giving a KVO alarm from the closet. That's the sound that the pump makes when it completes a drug treatment. That was on a weekend, with no patient or nurse in sight, on a device that's stored off completely in a totally empty cancer treatment center, and it had just gone off. I chose to hurry up and get the hell out of Dodge after connecting the new bottle. My second experience was actually worse. I was working on the same system when the door to the vault closed. Before you say that it isn't a big deal, these doors are about 8 inches thick and motorized. And then the machine started to actually move, like it was starting a treatment, while it was in service mode. This doesn't make it impossible, just extremely unlikely that it was just a simple malfunction, since in that mode you have to individually command each motion. Luckily, it didn't try to start the beam, and I got out of there before it went much further. I don't do Linux anymore, at least not alone. I worked at a nursing home for about 8 years. I came in for my shift one day and was informed that a resident on hospice care would likely be passing away during my shift. I was not on her floor, but the floor across from hers. There were 2 other girls who would be working with her that were both newly hired. I was told that the resident was afraid of dying and did not want to be alone. She had expressed this extensively to the staff. Her son had been with her all day, but that evening he went to get some dinner. During his absence, I saw one of the new girls running up the hall in distress. "Something's wrong with MJ," she said, speaking of the resident. I replied in my most calm manner to explain what was going on as I followed her to MJ's room. "She isn't responding, and her head is tipped to the side. She's got something coming out of her mouth," she exclaimed. Sure enough, MJ was sitting upright, her head cocked to the side. Her chest rose and fell laboriously, like a fish out of water. I went and stood behind her, cradling her head next to mine. I wrapped my arms around her. Both girls were scared and speaking loudly. "She's dying," they exclaimed. I shushed them and said everything was going to be all right. I asked them to get some supplies so that we could get MJ comfortable, mostly to just get them out of the room. I knew I had to be the rock, the one to call up order in the chaos. I knew MJ was close to drawing her last breath, and I knew that she was terrified of being alone. I held her in my arms and sang to her softly. I told her that everything would be all right. I said it over and over again until I could no longer feel her chest rise and fall. It was just MJ and I in that room, and now I was alone with a vessel that had once held her spirit. When the girls returned with clean linens, we carefully changed MJ, and the 3 of us worked together to lift her into her bed. I remember the odd feeling of holding her lifeless body, her slack limbs, and how the muscle no longer supported any of her joints. I felt I couldn't allow her head to fall backward, that even in death, it was vital to keep her supported. Her son had returned and was waiting outside of the room. I knew I had to prepare her perfectly. The memory of seeing your dead loved one is a core memory, one that you'll never forget. No one ever wants to see their loved one's dead, lifeless body. That's never, ever anything anyone wants. I had to ensure that this tender moment was portrayed with as much dignity as possible. I combed her hair, pulled the sheets up, made sure that there weren't any wrinkles in the bedding. I rested her hands on her chest and used a damp washcloth to close her eyes. When I was sure MJ looked as peaceful as possible, I opened the door and allowed him to begin his grieving process. I've never held someone as they transitioned from one life to the next. As sad as it was, I'm so glad that I could be there for her, that I could comfort her, help her let go, know that she was being cared for. I felt a deep welling in my own heart that I had done something good. I had shared with someone something that no other person was able to do in that moment. I held her while she died. I went to bed that night with a feeling of peace. At some point, I began to dream, and I want to say it was early morning when I felt the presence. The vision in my dream was a chamber of light, gold flecks, and taking on no shape recognizable. Her presence stood beside the head of the bed. She had been there all along, and now I could see her golden aura. In my dreams, I heard her feminine voice. She said thank you, and slowly faded away. I could feel her spirit ascend this earth, and I knew in my heart that MJ had made a point to tell me what I did had truly comforted her. This happened in a nursing home. I'm not a nurse. My girlfriend was a night shift CNA at a nursing home. My car was having trouble and broke down as I was leaving the lot. I was tired and decided to mess with it in the morning, so I put it in neutral and pushed it into a parking spot. Put it back in park, locked it up, went into the nursing home to sleep in a guest room that they had. During the night, I had to use the bathroom. I walked out into the hall. Luckily, there was a bathroom across the hall. While walking over to it, I heard someone say, "Hey," at the end of the hall. I looked over and I saw a young brunette woman, looked maybe 20 or so years old, in a blue dress, white heels, standing at the end of the hall. She looked like she was from the 50s or 60s. The material of the dress and just the way she looked. Bright red lipstick, not too much makeup, dressed sort of conservatively. I, being half awake, stared for a second and said, "Hey." She said, "What's your name?" I said, "I'm Bud. What's your name?" She said, "My name's Elizabeth." I said, "I gotta go to the bathroom. Please excuse me." She said, "All right. Live well." I said, "You too," and went into the bathroom. When I came out, looked down the hall, she wasn't there, but there were some CNAs at the end of the hall talking. I waved at them, and one of them waved back as I went back to the guest room. Then it hit me. She was a ghost or something. I went out into the back of the nursing home to smoke a cigarette. I sat there wondering about what I had seen. Was it real or was I crazy? I wasn't sure. I finally went back to bed. At 7 a.m., my girlfriend woke me up, and while we were going out to the car, she told me that a resident named Elizabeth had passed away, and that she was a very nice lady. I stopped and stared at her. She said, "What?" I said, "Not to sound weird, but are there any pictures of her when she was younger?" My girlfriend asks, "What? Why?" I said, "Is there?" She looked at me weirdly and said, "Follow me." She led me to the room that this woman had passed away in. There were a few pictures on the table, and one of them gave me chills. I picked it up and looked at it. Sure enough, it was her in the same dress. I I turned to my girlfriend and said, "I saw her last night. We greeted each other in the hallway." She said, "Okay, let's go fix your car." As we walked down the hall, I explained to her that I saw her like she was in that photo, not old but young. She said, "It doesn't surprise me, honestly. I've seen and heard a lot of weird stuff while working here. It's not exactly scary, but it creeped me out for a few days. Still creeps me out. I kept asking myself, why was she trying to talk to me? That question has yet to be answered." I had worked as a hospice nurse that sent me to this old hospital about 30 miles from where I had lived at the time. It was clean, but looked just like you'd stepped back into the 1950s. It was in a farming community, and at one time had delivered babies. My patient was passing late one night, and I got there at about 3 a.m. As I was walking to her room, I saw an older man with overalls and a plaid shirt, looking like he was lost. I asked if I could help him. He turned his back and just dissolved into the air. Scared the heck out of me. When I got to the nursing station, one of the nurses saw that I was deadly pale. She started laughing and yelled at the aides that I had seen old Henry. They laughed and then got serious. They told me that when the man was alive, his daughter went into labor, but things went wrong, and her and the baby died. When they had called her father, Henry, he'd been in such a hurry to get to the hospital that he'd been in a car wreck, and he and his wife were also killed. They told me that everyone sees him, but it's usually before someone passes away. The nurses then showed me a baby doll, one that they would put out into the room that's now abandoned. It was the delivery room. She said the only other time Henry comes out is when they put the baby out. I thought the story was so sad. To have your soul stuck on Earth, looking for your dead daughter and grandbaby. And sure enough, my little patient passed at 8 a.m. So, they were right about Henry showing up before someone passed. My dad worked in a hospice wing for almost 20 years and just retired earlier this spring. Back in the early 2000s, he worked with one of those broody, keeps-to-themselves types, a guy named Carlos. Carlos wasn't the friendliest person, but he arrived on time, and his patients never complained, so they just accepted that social skills weren't his forte. One day, they received a new patient, Carlos' grandfather, but obviously, Carlos wanted to care for him. The old man suffered from Alzheimer's and would often forget where he was or mistake Carlos for his older brother. My dad said that it was really hard to watch. Everyone felt sorry for them, and it was obviously affecting Carlos. Hell, who could blame him? I can only imagine what it's like to watch a grandparent or loved one slip away like that. Except it wasn't hurting Carlos in the way everyone thought it was. About 6 weeks later, his grandfather coded right after Carlos's shift ended. They were calling him before he made it to the parking lot. The doctors did everything they could, but the old man passed away. The problem was how he died. The doctor deemed the circumstances strange enough to warrant a toxicology report. They discovered enough sedatives to kill a horse. The security footage showed Carlos as the last one to enter his room, and when questioned by police, he confessed he'd been stockpiling medication for the entire 6 weeks, assuming no one would suspect foul play on the death of an Alzheimer's patient. When asked why he would want to kill his own grandfather, Carlos said the man had raised him and his older brother since they were 4 and 10, Unfortunately, he had abused them in horrible ways. He was the reason that Carlos's older brother had committed suicide at the age of 23. When Carlos turned 18, he moved out, never spoke to the old man again until he happened to show up in the hospice wing. His first instinct was to explain the situation and keep his distance. But then the old man called him by his brother's name, and something snapped inside. It suddenly seemed like a better plan to keep the past a secret and expedite his grandfather's departure. I don't really know how to feel about this. On one hand, I can't really blame Carlos. I mean, if there was ever a reason to kill. On the other hand, he ruined his life to kill someone who only had a couple of years left at best. What do you think? I maybe would have just kept my distance. When I was a kid, my mom worked as an ICU nurse. My dad was in the Navy, so I spent a lot of time coloring at the charge nurse's desk when we couldn't find a babysitter. The charge nurse was named Debbie, and she was always very understanding about our situation. She and my mom became close friends over the years that they worked together. Of course, everyone loved Debbie. People say that she was the sweetest woman to ever walk the earth, that the way she cared for her patients was inspiring. She treated them like family, and when she lost one, she retreated to a faraway corner to cry her eyes out. If someone didn't have visitors for whatever reason, she would sit with them on her breaks and stay after her shift. She worked at the hospital for 32 years, even after she was diagnosed with cancer in '93. When she physically couldn't keep going, they fixed her up in the hospital, and all the nurses took turns visiting her. Coworkers and patients were the only family she had left, and they wanted to make sure she wasn't alone in the end. A few weeks after she passed, a mother came into the ICU with her 2 children. They'd been in a car wreck and had all received severe injuries. Sadly, neither of the kids survived. When the mother woke from surgery and learned the news, my mom and one of the other nurses retreated to the crying corner. As they got close, they could hear someone else was already there, sobbing. It sounded just like Debbie. But when they made it to the spot, no one was there. It was basically a supply closet without a door. There was no other way out, yet the room was empty. My mom said she's seen too many things not to believe in ghosts, so that was enough for her to be certain that Debbie's spirit was still with them. But her friend and the other nurses would need more convincing. Over the next 2 years, almost every doctor and nurse heard the crying at least once. It happened every time a particularly tragic death occurred, and, well, it was a hospital, so we're talking about not a rare occurrence. I wish I knew what's been happening in more recent years, but that's when we moved away. There wasn't much in the way of social media at the time, but then, if you moved across the country, you just never saw your old friends again. Strange concept, I know. Well, whatever happened there, I hope Debbie's at peace. My ex-wife worked as a night nurse at an old folks' home in a quiet corner of Dunedin, New Zealand. After a while, she came home telling me about nocturnal disturbances they had been having there, which caused them to eventually call the police. Apparently, there were always people shuffling around the building's grounds at night. She could see them standing there at 1 or 2 a.m., looking out over the grounds. At first, she thought a confused resident had perhaps gotten up and gone out to the garden. So she went, checking on all the rooms, but found everybody was in their beds. When she went outside to check, nobody was there. The police also never found anybody. What really got me, though, was how coolly she took it. As a long-time nurse with many years of experience, it seemed normal to her that there was a bit of paranormal going on in places where people died. To her, ghosts came through the hospital like medication cabinets and cleaning utensils. It was just normal, I guess. I actually have several stories of my time working as a pharmacist at the hospital pharmacy. This particular pharmacy was in the basement, and I also used to work third shift. To be fair, third shift in the basement with the emergency lights on, only that is creepy enough, but I always felt like I was being watched or followed too. It started one night when I was gathering IV supplies to take back to the pharmacy for preparation of the next day. Something kept kicking my cart, knocking the supplies off. So I started brick stacking them so that they were more stable and bringing the bins with me so that the supplies wouldn't fall off the cart. This one night I gathered up the supplies, brought them back to our IV room and started putting them away when the cart goes flying across the room, scattering everything. Then, from the bins where I was placing the new supplies, things start just flying straight out of there, at me. Not from the top, not from the middle of the stacks. From the bottom, 1-liter bags of NS flying at my head. After about the 10th bag, I just yelled, "Enough," and it stopped. I picked up what had fell and I started rearranging things when I saw that the cart that I was working from was rolling back towards me. It stopped right at my waist, and I swear on my life, the bags still on the cart moved so slowly and deliberately back into their brick pattern. I was stunned. So after this event and several weeks of similar encounters, one night I finally just said, "Look, I don't care that you follow me, but I'm super busy, and I can't handle your shenanigans. If you're going to be my shadow, at least help me out." For the rest of the night, every time I went to push the elevator button, it illuminated in front of me. These were service elevators, not the kind in the lobby with multiple buttons. After that, anytime I lost something, be it a pen, marker, stamp with my initials, bag of medicines, it always reappeared on this certain spot on a shelf in our compounding area. I rarely used that area on third shift, but I swear, all I had to do was ask where it was, and within 10 minutes it would be in the exact same spot, every time. I left that hospital after 2 years, and on my way home after my last shift, something that happened that to this day I think saved my life. I was leaving as the sun was coming up. I was driving home. My radio shut off unexpectedly. It was a 2013 Focus, and this had never happened. So as I'm messing with the controls, in a split second, the sun hit me in the face. The radio came on blaring, which scared me, and I slammed on my brakes. When I looked up, I was inches away from this SUV, stopped in the middle of the road, hazards flashing. I immediately look up in my rearview mirror expecting someone to almost be hitting me, and I caught the slightest glimpse of this boy in my back seat, who then vanished on a double take. Though I only saw him for a second, his image is forever in my memory. He was dusty looking. He had sandy hair and an old bowl cut style, button-up shirt, cloth pants, biggest grin on his face, sitting perfectly in the middle of my back seat. That was the last time I ever saw or felt his presence. I've had a few experiences at the various hospitals I've worked at, but they don't really scare me, just kind of catch me off guard. I've never worked the night shift before, but one time the company suggested we stay the night in the building because there was a hurricane in the city. A lot of people decided to risk it and go home, while I decided to stay because I had to cross a river to get home. So it was maybe around 10 p.m. I was waiting for the elevator so I could go downstairs to find something to eat. I see the elevator door open and a man walked in. Then I walked in. The elevator was empty. About 2 years before, a coworker had taken his own life in the building. I think it may have been his wandering soul. The next one also intrigues me more than frightens me. About 3 years later, I had a new job, working the afternoon shift. I would get off around 11 p.m. As I was walking to the bus stop, I looked up and saw a huge white ball. I thought to myself, what a bright moon we have today. Then I looked elsewhere in the sky and saw the moon. What? Didn't I just see the moon? So I looked back at the first moon, and it flew away at the speed of light. I wasn't the only person to have seen this. A couple of nurses said they could see it from the hospital. True story. I was just 18 and working as a healthcare assistant on a large medical surgical ward. My mother and my dad's sister both worked at and trained at the same hospital, though not the unit I was working on. A family friend, Jen, one of the best nurses I've ever worked with, worked nights and I was working with her. It was after the midnight rounds. A woman about 50 had been admitted to room 205 that day. She was waiting for exploratory abdominal surgery. These were the days before MRI scans, and undiagnosable abdominal problems often resulted in open surgery. We had just sat down. The nurse's station was in the middle of the long hall, and all of the rooms were easily visible. The lights flickered. No big deal. Then, a shadow moved down the hall and stopped by room 205, where it lingered. Jen hit me on the arm and yelled, "Get the code cart and bring it to 205, now." Jen ran for the room. I got the cart. The other nurses heard us and headed there too. "The Angel, it's a code," Jen yelled to the other nurse. She said, "I'll get the doctor." Jen was doing CPR. In an instant, the room was filled with people, and I went into the hall. There was a gentle breeze, and just outside the door, a darkness. Suddenly, the hall got bright. Just at that instant, I heard, "She's gone. Call it." The lady had an aneurysm and had died. I was a bit shaken. As Jen and I prepped the body, I said, "How did you know?" She said, "That's the Angel. When you see her, run. The patient is dying. Did you see her light up?" I told her I didn't see anything, just that it was dark and then light. She said, "When it goes like that, they're gone. Some people think that it was a nurse who worked here and that she's still on duty." I thought she was being a little silly, and in my head, I decided it was just faulty fluorescent lights and my own anxiety. But I asked my mom, and she said, "Ask anyone. They all know the Angel." Fast forward 6 years, and I'm no longer an HCA, but a healthcare professional myself. I'm on the same ward as a patient. My gallbladder hated me and decided to act up. I'd had it out, the old-fashioned and miserable way. I was really uncomfortable. So although it was late, I was watching TV. The lady next to me was an elderly lady who had broken her hip. She was sleeping peacefully. I became aware of a dark cloud over the TV screen, which was on the wall over the foot of the bed. I felt a gentle breeze. I yelled at the top of my lungs, 208, the Angel. The darkness paused and softened. I felt an amazing sense of calm, then chaos as everyone burst into the room. The lady next to me was in respiratory arrest. The darkness lingered. Then, instead of flickering light as it did before, it just faded. I felt calm and at ease, and my pain had lessened. They started to roll the lady out on a trolley. "Your roommate is going to the ICU," they told me, as they moved my bed to push hers past. Jen was on and came from the other side of the curtain to straighten out the room. "You saw her?" I nodded and told her that I saw a shadow, but it felt so calm. "Well, she was just in time. How did you know? Did she wake you up?" I told her I'd been watching television and a shadow moved across it. She laughed. "It couldn't be. We turn off the televisions at 10. It's nearly 1 a.m. I looked up. The TV was off. My headphones in the drawer. I have no idea how I saw her. I don't know that it was a her at all, but it was something, and it was there. And it was there either to usher someone on with calmness or to give them a chance. I'm not sure. Maybe it was a nurse's instincts, but maybe it was just someone who took her work so seriously she stayed on long after life left her, looking after those who needed her. All I really know is I felt so calm and strengthened and not at all afraid in the presence of whatever it was. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open for deep sleep videos, and of course, double features. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons, whom we appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, Adrienne, and TF Parham. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.